So today I'll be giving this talk on how do I know if cells are happy. So this talk was given to me last year in 2000. I did this in 2018 June or July in Hyderabad conference. So this topic you wouldn't get a ready-made answer as to how how to go about this topic. So the way I went about is I think cells you can look at liquid cells and solid cells. So I looked at solid cells as indication that they are happy when your microcirculation is good. So tools to optimize microcirculation was something that we looked into to see if cells could be kept happy. And I looked at variables influencing immune cells or liquid cells. So how would these cells which are immunely active could be kept happy? So this is how I went about preparing for this talk. So we look at first at solid cells. So when you have to look at the microcirculation at the cellular level, I think the cells are happy when they're getting constant supply of nutrients or oxygen, and cells are happy when there is an efflux of all the waste products from the cells, and cells are happy when there is a good regulation of temperature that is happening, and this regulation of temperature happens with good auto regulation between the arteriolar and venular components. So this is how in essence you can say that cells are happy or cells could be kept normal. And there are certain mechanisms which facilitate these processes in the cells. So the supply of nutrients, the supply of oxygen, efflux of waste products, and maintenance of temperature. And these control mechanisms happen at systemic level and happen at local level. So at systemic level, so these controls are sort of influenced by autonomic nervous system, then renin-angiotensin system, and vasopressin. So this autonomic nervous system and renin-angiotensin system is influenced by the basal tone of the cardiovascular system and by the plasma volume. So the local factors that influence the health of the cell or the microcirculation or the agents which cause vasodilatation or vasoconstriction. So the vascular endothelium produces nitric oxide, prostaglandins, and thromboxane. So all these three have a bearing on the microcirculation because they may have vasoconstrictor abilities or vasodilatory sort of properties which has a bearing on microcirculation. And there are certain agents which act as a trigger for the release of these nitric oxide, prostaglandins, and thromboxane. So these are ADP, bradykinin, histamine, and substance P. So these are some of the variables that influence the release of nitric oxide, prostaglandins, and thromboxane from the vascular endothelial cells. And as we know, nitric oxide is a vasodilator. So these are some of the agents which have an influence on the release. And there are other agents like adenosine, potassium, hydrogen, or carbon dioxide. They also have a bearing on microcirculation by causing vasodilation. So this is how your whole cellular function is influenced, one predominantly by your systemic factors and by the local factors. So what happens in sepsis? So in sepsis, what we have realized is there is heterogeneity in the arteriolar circulation and venular drainage. So there is a capillary heterogeneity that happens. Because there is heterogeneity, there is a reduction in the oxygen delivery and there is hypoxemia that sets in due to inappropriate vasoconstrictor and vasodilatory response of these arterioles that happens. And what it means is there is a reduced responsiveness of these arterioles to noxious stimuli. So and this leads to vasodilatation, and there is extensive leakage of protein and inflammatory cells within the cell from the arterioles. And this typically happens in ARDS, where you have a inappropriate response at the capillary level, and there's a lot of leakage of protein and inflammatory cells within the uh, cells and from the arterioles. And the main reason for this reduced responsiveness of the arterioles happens by nitric oxide, and that seems to be the trigger for the reduced responsiveness of the arterioles. So when you look at the whole nitric oxide pathophysiology, so it is the L-arginine which gets converted to nitric oxide in the presence of nitric oxide synthase, and this nitric oxide in combination with activated guanylate cyclase leads to conversion of GTP, guanidine triphosphate, to cyclic GMP, and this cyclic guanidine monophosphate leads to upregulation of protein kinase in the smooth muscle cells, and this leads to smooth muscle dilatation, and this smooth muscle dilatation is what leads to hypotension and vascular dilatation, and the smooth muscle dilatation within the vessels is also caused by activation of these potassium channels and by inhibition of calcium uptake by these muscles within the vascular endothelium or smooth muscle cells. So this is the pathophysiology as to how nitric oxide leads to smooth muscle relaxation within the vessel wall, leading to hypotension. So this is what typically happens, and this is the role of nitric oxide. Okay. So, and nitric oxide, if you look at nitric oxide synthase, I think there are three variants of them. So there is nitric oxide synthase inhibitor, there is inducible nitric oxide synthase, then there is endothelial nitric oxide synthase. So this inducible nitric oxide synthase, usually in the body it is present as iNOS, and this gets converted to nitric oxide, which is a trigger for vasodilation and hypotension in the presence of these agents, cytokines and endotoxins, which get released when there is a potent infection or when there is exposure to endotoxemia or endotoxin due to infection. And this is how the whole concept of nitric oxide comes to play when there is a hypotension in severe sepsis. And endothelial nitric oxide synthase has a bearing on the tone of the vessels. So obviously when there is a excessive production of endothelial nitric oxide synthase, so this has a deleterious bearing on the tone of the vessel wall, which leads to obviously hypotension. So we'll now move on from the cellular aspect to the capillary surface area. So what we have understood is, in sepsis, when we talk about microcirculatory dysfunction, what that means is, microcirculation we understand is predominantly influenced by the capillaries. So there is capillary density significantly comes down when there is sepsis or microcirculatory dysfunction. Why does that happen? Because of thrombi formation within the arterioles and venules. So there are microthrombi formation that happens very early in sepsis, which typically clogs these capillaries by clogging the arterioles and venules. Because it clogs, there is effective microcirculation that is not happening, and that leads to microcirculatory dysfunction, and that we measure by microcirculation or the capillary density. And now we'll look at reactive oxygen species. So in sepsis, we understood there is increased production of reactive oxygen species, and there is a combination of superoxide with nitric oxide leading to peroxynitrate, which also has a deleterious effects on the microcirculation. So this is in brief the pathophysiology of why vascular dysfunction or microcirculatory dysfunction happens in sepsis. So why is it important? So now, having understood what are all the agents that have a influence on the microcirculation, so why is it important? Do we believe that microcirculatory function is important? So what we have understood is, when there is improvement, if you consider this pictorially as a microcirculation, which is arterioles, venules and capillaries, so we have understood that improvement in this microcirculation or in this capillary network has shown to improve the organ function, and if there is a dysfunction of this, it impairs the organ function, and when there is a dysfunction of this, so we have understood that leads to worse clinical outcomes. So but we do not have sort of effective tools to measure the function of this microcirculation. So on contrary, what we do for that is we monitor macrohemodynamics, because we do not have effective tools to measure how this microcirculation is functioning in the body. So instead, what we do is we end up measuring systemic arterial pressure, cardiac output, heart rate, and mixed venous saturation, and we correlate that by improving these, that microcirculation also would improve. But does that work that way? So it has been found even if you improve systemic arterial pressure, cardiac output or heart rate, it has not shown improvement in the microcirculatory function. So we have seen that improving your macro hemodynamics not necessarily will improve microcirculation. That's what we have understood. And we have found that in our zeal and enthusiasm to improve macro circulation by use of noradrenaline, in fact, has shown to worsen the microcirculation. It inhibits microcirculation. So this is what we have understood. So now we need to see what are all the tools that we have, at least in an experimental setting, to assess microcirculation. So we have indirect tools, we have direct tools, and then we have dynamic tools. Okay. So the indirect is tissue oxygenation and tissue carbon dioxide. So we have some tools to measure tissue oxygenation and carbon dioxide as a tool of to assess or ascertain microcirculation. And we have tools to assess mixed venous saturation, and this can be a surrogate marker for assessing microcirculation. And lactate is a reasonably good surrogate marker to correlate with microcirculation. And near infrared spectroscopy is something that has been used to assess the microcirculation. So we have certain direct tools. So laser Doppler is one of them, and there are these fancy instruments like orthogonal polarization, spectral, side stream dark field, and incident dark field. So these are all the instruments which has been utilized to measure microcirculation. I think what is of relevance for our intensive care is this dynamic tools, which is vascular occlusion techniques. I think this is something I want you all to pay attention, because I think this seems to be more promising to assess microcirculation in future. Okay. So let's look at lactate as a surrogate marker of microcirculation. So we need to understand how this lactate works. So in aerobic conditions where it's a happy situation, this pyruvate gets converted to acetyl CoA in the presence of pyruvate dehydrogenase, and this acetyl CoA enters the Krebs cycle, and then it produces cofactors, and these cofactors in the undergo oxidative phosphorylation and produce 36 ATP. So this is a normal process happening in our cells to keep our solid cells happy. But if this process for any reason gets affected because of anaerobic conditions, then you have ineffective production of these ATPs, and cells become anoxic, or they become dysfunctional, or they become unhappy. So what happens in anaerobic conditions? In anaerobic conditions, pyruvate, instead of pyruvate dehydrogenase, in the presence of lactic dehydrogenase, it gets converted to lactic acid, and in the process it leaves NAD plus, so it releases one NAD, and this lactic acid gets converted to lactate and hydrogen ions. But it doesn't mean that they do not produce any ATPs. This lactic acid undergoes glycolysis to produce ATPs, but not effective ATPs, not 36 ATPs. So there are inadequate ATPs with production of lactate, which makes cells unhappy or cells dysfunctional. So this is what happens in anaerobic conditions. So what happens at the cellular level? Because there is cellular hypoxemia due to arteriolar supply which is not good, there is increase in the lactate production within the cells. So because of this, because of local hypoxemia, there is an imbalance between the oxygen delivery and oxygen consumption. Your oxygen delivery comes down, your oxygen consumption comes down, and that leads to cellular dysfunction at cellular level. But there are caveats to this perfect sort of a correlation that we are seeing, because even with aerobic glycolysis in sepsis, so it's not like there is always anaerobic conditions. In the early part of the sepsis, there is activation of aerobic glycolysis. So it is an extensive activation of aerobic cycles. So there also you have lactate increase even without microcirculatory dysfunction present. So what I'm trying to say is, increase in the lactate not always is equal to microcirculatory dysfunction, because even in aerobic glycolysis activation there is increased lactate production, although there is microcirculatory dysfunction which is not present at that particular time. Okay. And another caveat of lactate is, if someone is on beta blockers and still there is a microcirculatory dysfunction, lactate may fail to increase. So that is a caveat. And lactate may go up in liver dysfunction when there is sepsis, although there is no microcirculatory dysfunction. So what I'm only trying to say in this particular slide is that lactate, there are other reasons why lactate may go up or lactate may not go up, irrespective of microcirculatory dysfunction, if it is present or not present. So it is not always linearly correlating with the microcirculatory dysfunction. So there are certain caveats which you need to keep in mind. So there may be microcirculatory dysfunction, but patients on beta blocker, lactate may not go up. So those are the typical examples. So we'll talk about near infrared spectroscopy to determine your microcirculatory dysfunction. So basically what simply near infrared spectroscopy does is it looks at differential absorption of infrared between oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin. So by measuring the differential absorption, I think you are able to ascertain whether there is microcirculatory dysfunction. So by doing this differential absorption of infrared between oxy and deoxy, you are able to determine the tissue oxygen saturation. So what simply is done is basically you throw an incident light into a tissue. So tissue absorbs. So basically tissue absorbs some light, and you measure the reflected light, and you see the difference. What is absorbed, what is delivered, and what is reflected, and this gives rise to tissue oxygen saturation. And this has a it is directly proportional to this formula. So it is calculated by this formula, which is absorption coefficient plus pathway of light plus scattering. So this is, and they use modified Beer-Lambert law to measure the tissue oxygen saturation. So this is a fancy formula where A is absorbance, I is the intensity of light that is thrown, and L is the length of the vessel on which it is which is captured. So basically use this formula and ascertain tissue oxygen saturation. So this is the physiology. Whether this has any clinical application to determine microcirculatory dysfunction, yes, we have this from these studies. So this was a study by US group where they have looked at if tissue oxygen saturation is less than 70%, it was shown to have 2.8 times increase in the risk for ICU admission. And this was another study by UK group. It was found that if your tissue oxygen saturation is less than 75%, there was twofold increase in mortality. And if there is no improvement in the tissue oxygen saturation following your resuscitative measures, then it may portend non-survival in those patients. So which means there is a reasonable correlation of tissue oxygen saturation with regards to the microcirculation and its ability to determine the prognosis in the patient. So we look at direct measures. So what we have seen is we have looked at indirect measures, we have looked at lactate, so we have looked at tissue oxygen saturation. So we look at direct measures. So direct measures, you have video microscopes which directly measure the capillary density, because capillary density will tell you how effectively microcirculation is happening, and this video microscope will help you to determine the perfusion by this microcirculation and the flow, because as I mentioned in the early part of the sepsis, flow gets affected because of microthrombi formation within the arterioles and venules. And any abnormalities that are detected in video microscope has been shown to increase the hospital mortality. So the video microscopes that are currently available are orthogonal polarization spectral and side stream direct field. So these are like large microscopes which you place on the skin or in the sublingual circulation, and basically you look at the capillaries and it will capture certain variables. And but these are large, as you see, these are large microscopes, operator dependent, and it needs a lot of analytical tools. So there is incident direct field. This is a smaller one, handheld, and this is a sublingual circulation which shows all microthrombi formation. So they do epi illumination, and it can capture an image area of only 1.55 into 1.16 millimeter. So it's a small area on which you keep the probe and measure the microcirculation. But as of now, we do not have a good data on diagnostic utility and the reference values to say that microcirculatory dysfunction is prevailing. So there was a sort of 2006 consensus statement as to how to interpret these microcirculatory dysfunction by using these video microscopes. So they looked at analysis of the sublingual circulation. This came from the Belgian group. So they looked at three indices as a measure of microcirculatory dysfunction in sublingual circulation. So they looked at the density of the capillaries, they looked at perfusion of vessels at the capillary level, then they looked at heterogeneity index, and they came out with these variables. So they determined that in sepsis, when you have to say there is microcirculatory dysfunction, in sublingual vessels there is reduction in the perfusion vessel density, which means the number of vessels perfusing has come down. So the density has come down, maybe because of the microthrombi formation. And they have looked at proportion of perfusion vessels also comes down in sepsis. And there is microcirculatory flow index that they calculate. The flows also are interrupted in these patients. So these are the indices they measure in sublingual circulation to determine if microcirculatory dysfunction is prevailing in sepsis patients. And is this clinically relevant? And they have looked at heterogeneity index. So heterogeneity index is that your flow of blood is not homogeneous, it's very heterogeneous because of lot of circulatory disturbance that is happening at the microcirculation. So is this all clinical relevant? I think this was looked in MicroSOAP study. So MicroSOAP study was a European study where they looked at 501 patients with sepsis, and they found that microcirculatory flow index, which is all these measures what I mentioned, was abnormal in 17% of the sepsis, and the patient group which had abnormal microcirculatory flow index, the odds of dying was very high. Odds ratio was 3.24. And they found all these patients who had microcirculatory flow index abnormality had increase in the heterogeneity index, and they had reduction in the proportion of perfusion vessels, and perfusion vessel density had come down. So which means there was a good correlation in ascertaining that which are the patients which have microcirculatory dysfunction and its bearing on clinical outcome. So this is what they show. And so these are all the formulas and the reference values to measure all these microcirculatory flow index and total vessel density and proportion of perfusion vessels and perfusion vessel density. You can go through that. So we look into the dynamic. I think this holds good promise is what I feel in assessing microcirculation and response to the treatment. I think this is what I want you to focus. It's a vascular occlusion technique, so it's a very simple sort of a principle. But if you have tools to measure this, I think they would be tremendously be useful to ascertain microcirculation. So what you do is, so basically you put a blood pressure curve and you inflate the blood pressure curve to more than systolic blood pressure. So what happens is, once you uh, inflate the curve above systolic blood pressure, there is oxygen delivery comes down. So there is a tissue desaturation that happens, and then suddenly you release it. When you release it, there is a resaturation of all the tissues that happens, and you call this as a resaturation curve. And after resaturation, because there is a profound increase in the resaturation, there is an area of hyperemia that sustains for a brief period of time during the resaturation phase. So this is a desaturation phase and this is a resaturation phase. And you look at the time for resaturation. I think that will indicate to you so whether the microcirculation is good or bad. So is this clinically relevant? They have done studies. So this was a study by Skarda et al. So where they have looked at the percentage of resaturation in 1 second. So percentage of tissue resaturation. So in healthy, as you see, the percentage saturation per second is more in healthy patients. In sepsis, it is reduced, which means there is some microcirculatory. It is indicative of microcirculatory dysfunction that your reperfusion or resaturation is not happening effectively, and that was statistically significant. And this was another study by the Dutch group. So there also they looked at healthy patients, 245 patients, 160 sepsis patients, 455 septic shock. If you look at the resaturation percentage per second, it was very good in healthy and it came down in sepsis patients, and it was even lower in septic shock, and that was also statistically significant. So all these two studies indicate to us that vascular occlusive techniques is a good tool to determine your microcirculatory dysfunction. And even it was found that where tissue resaturation did not happen well, so it was associated with non-survivors. So, and this came from these two studies. And if tissue oxygen saturation happened very well, then it portends that survival may be better. Okay. So then let's look at this simple age-old sort of a clinical sign that we look in emergency or in ICU. So I think most of my people who are listening to this talk would know that if you see any sepsis patient with this sort of a mottling, then you know this patient is very very sick and he may not do well. So which means his peripheries may be cold and there is a delayed capillary. Basically, there is a whole lot of skin hypoperfusion that has set in, which is really indicative that your microcirculation is grossly impaired. Okay, so and this was a study done by the French group where they have shown if any patient has this mottling, so this mottling may be present in 46 to 70% of the septic shock, and this was shown to have increased mortality. So which means if you any of us see such a patient, we know they are very sick, mortality can be very high. And this was another study by French group where they showed if someone comes with this situation, there is fourfold increase in the risk of mortality. But what we are interested in trying to ascertain is whether can we identify this much before we see it evidently like this. So that's why they come out with something called thermal mottling. So thermal mottling, these tools are currently available in the market. Basically, they are using it to identify hot tumors for looking at the breast tumors or thyroid tumors by identifying the temperature difference between the normal tissue and the malignant tissue. I think if these tools are made easily available, we could utilize this to determine because they pick up much before it becomes clinically evident, and we call it as thermal mottling. And the way it picks up is they use formulas with Stephen Boltzmann laws and basically detects this situation much before they become clinically apparent. I think this also holds promise for us to ascertain microcirculatory dysfunction. So the summary of microcirculation for you is it is very important for us to understand that your microcirculation maintains structural and functional integrity of tissue cells, and this microcirculation is profoundly affected in sepsis leading to organ dysfunction. And what we have always believed that improving macro hemodynamics, like improving systemic arterial pressure, improving cardiac output, increasing heart rate or stroke volume, we believe that it improves the microcirculation. But macro hemodynamics, we have realized it fails to assess the microcirculation. And assessment of microcirculation can be done by three groups: direct measures, which is all those big microscopes, so you need to have OPS, orthogonal polarization spectral, incident direct field, all that. And indirect is by measuring surrogate markers, which we went through. So lactate, tissue oxygen saturation, mixed venous saturations. I think these remain reasonably good tools to measure microcirculation by indirect means. And vascular occlusion technique is a dynamic way of assessing your microcirculation. I think vascular occlusion techniques appears a reasonable tool. And I think dynamic microcirculation plus thermal mottling, which I mentioned, appears feasible, and I think they hold promise for future in determining which of our patients have microcirculation and ability to measure intervention tools to improve microcirculation. So that is about what makes solid cells happy. Solid cells are cells which are supplied by the vessels and the tools to improve. So now let's look at what makes these liquid cells happy. Liquid cells, I call it as all immune cells which are floating within the circulation, and how do they keep happy. So what we have understood is after a patient has had a sepsis, there is a situation called immunosuppression or compensatory anti-inflammatory response syndrome they develop after sepsis, where it's an immune suppressed phase. So sepsis is a where there is lot of pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokine activation, but after the effect, the acute phase of sepsis, they go into a stage of immunosuppression. What happens during this phase? Cells are very unhappy because there is something called epigenetics. So there is a genetic epigenetic sort of a modulations or changes or regulations that cells undergo, and there is energy failure within the cells. So why that happens? Because when cell is exposed to constant insult with endotoxin, cells develop increased tolerance to this endotoxin, and there is increased in the apoptosis of these cells. So they get into a phase where they have these sort of epigenetic changes, and they develop increased tolerance to endotoxin and they undergo sort of apoptosis. And post sepsis, what we have found is the neutrophils or the inflammatory cells become very fatigued and they fail to throw out the bacteria. There is impaired clearance of toxins and bacteria from the cell, and there is more production of reactive oxygen species. And the cells, since they have lost this energy, they have lost the energy, so they fail to move to the site where they need to go and have a put up a defensive mechanism. So they fail to get recruited at the septic source or the septic sites. So there is decreased recruitment of these cells, and it is being found in the post sepsis the natural killer cells also, their number comes down, and there is alteration in the natural killer cells, and there is reduced production of interferon gamma by these natural killer cells. So these are all the changes that happen after the sepsis. And there is increased production of myeloid depressor cells, myeloid derived suppressor cells. So there is increased production of myeloid derived suppressor cells. And it has been found that there are the dendritic cells which also undergo changes in their phenotype, and there is reduced in the cytokine production by these dendritic cells in the sepsis. And what has been found is, I think this is an important tool that is now, a lot of work is happening on this and a lot of studies have come out. There is something called reduced expression of HLA-DR by these dendritic cells and by these macrophages, which leads to immune failure. So when there is a sepsis, when there is an infection, you may successfully treat the infection with antibiotics, but what possibly will kill the patient is this immune failure due to all these cellular changes that sets in because of immune changes. So this is what we have understood. So after sepsis, after you have treated the infection effectively, they go into immune dissonance or immune failure because of all these genetic changes and aberrations that happen in these cell lines. Okay. So is this relevant? HLA-DR4, so they have done this study. So what they have found is, if your HL, as I said, in post sepsis, HLA-DR expression by dendritic cells and phagocytic cells come down. So they have found if your mHLA-DR cell expression is more than 8,000, and this was done in 37 patients, only 4 deaths happened, 10%. But if you see this mHLA-DR is less than 8,000, so there is a reduced expression of HLA-DR in 55 patients, 65% of them died, so 22. So this clinical study correlates that HLA-DR expression was very relevant as to how patients will do when they have sepsis. Okay. So, and these are all the number of studies that are being done on HLA-DR. So it is not something which is hypothetical. So there are at least some 10 studies that are done which indicates to you that HLA-DR expression is very useful, and maybe we may have days when we may do routinely HLA-DR expression and see whether this patient is going to get better from sepsis or this patient is going to die out of sepsis. So how do we monitor adaptive immune alteration in sepsis? Our ability to measure HLA-DR has given rise to working on these alternative therapies for sepsis, which is immune adjunctive therapies, use of GM-CSF, granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor, a granulocyte colony stimulating factor, or interferon, as immune modulators to see if we could alter the course of sepsis when there is reduced HLA-DR expression in these patients. And we have tried to measure these pro-inflammatory cytokines which are reduced in sepsis, and we are in a position to measure these anti-inflammatory cytokines which tends to increase in sepsis, like interleukin 10 or co-inhibitory receptor programmed cell death 1 and cytotoxic lymphocyte antigen 4, and looking at the CD4 and CD25 regulation. So these are some of the measures that we are doing to see if any tools could be utilized to alter these inflammatory markers and change the outcome of sepsis. And even we are looking at ATP production by these T lymphocytes to see and determine how the prognosis of a sepsis patient would be. So there is, at this point of time, I would say there is no gold standard for evaluation of the T cell function, and there are promising immunotherapy agents that are being evolved to circumvent all the cellular or the immunological changes that gets manifested in sepsis by development of recombinant human interleukin 7 or anti-programmed death inhibitor antibodies. So these are some of the experimental agents people are working on to see if the course of sepsis could be altered by having a positive bearing or a favorable bearing on immunological cells. So the summary of immune cells is, we have understood that in sepsis we may have tools to counter infective agents well, but we do not have currently tools to alter post sepsis syndrome what develops, which is called as CARS, compensated anti-inflammatory response syndrome, or you can call it as sepsis induced immune suppression or cellular reprogramming phase. This is where all your immune cells which are useful to fight the sepsis or mitigate the sepsis get dysfunctional, and there is aberration in the function of these cells, and this leads to immune dissonance or immune failure. And we have understood that immune monitoring is very important at this point of time, and by immune monitoring we may have immune adjunctive therapies which may benefit the patient and alter the course of their response to sepsis. And I think immune stratification, there are clinical trials happening to identify the patients who respond well in sepsis and who may not respond well. So in that way you may be able to identify and immune stratify which are the patients who are more immune responsive and who are not immune responsive. I think functional immune tests, like functional immune tests or ATP production by the T cells, I think that remains gold standard, but we need more practical tools to measure all that. So we need more research, more robust biomarkers of immune function. We need further development in all these to try to identify which are the patients who may not do well in sepsis. So thank you very much. So that's about the whole topic about how we keep the solid cells happy and the newer tools or the evolutionary sort of a concepts in how to keep the liquid cells happy. So thank you very much.